Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon, welcome back. Welcome for those joining us online. Thank you for making us part of your day. Thanks for joining us again this afternoon. Thank you for joining us here in the room. It's lovely to have you here. Just a very quick show of hands. Anyone that is new in the room this afternoon? Welcome, welcome. And anyone who's actually, today is their first day of being here? It's really, really nice to see you here. Thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts and your insight as well, and networking and talking to everybody. It's really, really good to have you here. Thank you. I'm sure you've all read the programme and know what's coming up. Let me just tell you, later this afternoon, we've got a fabulous conversation about research and innovation. It's actually the first time that there's been a dedicated panel to research and innovation here. And we will have some brilliant examples of projects, that award-winning projects, no less, that have really taken research and innovation, done some great things with it, but also then shared their knowledge as well. So that's coming up a little bit later. But first, a panel that I know a lot of people have been very much looking forward to. We're talking about food sovereignty and nourishing food sovereignty. So please welcome your moderator to take you through this panel, Anya Sithram. Anya, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sasha. And great to hear that some of you have come this afternoon, especially for this panel. Well, perhaps not, maybe for the other panels that are coming up. But we're going to be exploring food sovereignty in the EU, and an enlarged EU. We're going to be talking about geopolitical challenges and the opportunities and challenges of international trade. And as part of this, we're going to be looking at critical import dependencies, sustainability, and fair competition in international trade. However, before our panel, we're going to have a keynote speaker who's going to set the scene. So please welcome to the podium Sébastien Aby, Managing Director, Club Demeter, which describes itself as a unique ecosystem of decision makers from the agricultural, industrial, and agri-food sectors. Sébastien, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, I will speak in French in order to be diplomatically correct, especially when we talk about geopolitics. So my presentation is in 3 parts, talking about the food Everest, then talking about the Agri-food Days, and at the end, explaining some consideration for European Union and member states. Tout d'abord, donc.
So, first and foremost, when it comes to the issue of food sovereignty, trade, Europe, given the context we are currently in, the first thing I want to say is that we need to take a long-term look at things. Why is that important? Well, of course, we're coming to the end of the first quarter of this century, and Europe's strength lies in the agricultural world, and we need to take a long-term view of all of these issues to know where we're headed into the future and to know how we can do better in the future. We have a long agricultural history, of course, and we've always tried to do better throughout that history. The same goes for European history. We've always tried to move forward to make a better future for ourselves. Now, why do I say that? Well, when we talk about the agro-food Everest, before we talk about Europe and before we talk about the immediate challenges we're facing, we need to bear in mind 3 different things, 3 paths, you could call them, things that the whole planet will need to do during this century. First of all, you've got the security element. Agriculture is a universal issue. It provides food for all. It's something that affects us on a daily basis, that affects the entire planet on a daily basis. And this is something that is true throughout history, not just in Europe. It's something that has led to peace, to confidence and trust, to solidarity, to development. Without agriculture, we'll have no food. That's obvious, goes without saying. We're all specialists here. But when we take a look at the geopolitical point of view, you'll see that when you don't have agricultural activity in a region or in a country, it's always more difficult to build food security. And when there's no food security in a country or a region, it's always more unstable from a geopolitical point of view as well. So we need to bear that in mind over the next year, 2025, because we've never had more people in the world than we have today. Over 8 billion in the world. Since just this morning, there are about 150,000 people more living in the world. It's a figure that's increasing every single day.
Toi, tu ne vas pas devoir manger.
No baby born since midnight has been told you won't need to eat, of course. The world is more populated than ever, and we have a greater need than ever for energy, for calories, for food, in order that we can live healthy lives, in order that children can flourish and reach their full potential. Food is the essential fuel for human development, for human security. That's true at the individual level and also on a collective scale, of course, as well. No one can go without food. So geopolitically speaking, in Europe, the objective is an ambitious one. And we can talk about it being an objective for the whole planet, and that's to increase our stability. And the more we can do that, the more we can guarantee food security, high quality food, the right quantity of food. And the more we have that, the better chance we have of guaranteeing stability and peace for the future. That goes for us, that goes for others, that goes for the entire planet and how we live together. And what's true at the local level is very much true at the international level as well. So we can work on our food security on an individual level, but if you've got neighbours or people close by who are suffering, who don't have food, then that affects you as well. That affects you and your own security as well. So more than ever today, we are dependent on each other. And I know a lot of times we're reluctant to talk about dependence, especially in the post-COVID world, but we are dependent on others. And the first type of interdependence that we can talk about these days is the fact that as people in this world, we depend on farmers, on fishers who provide us with food. That is the greatest interdependence that we have among us. We haven't found a solution to going out without food as of yet. There's a second matter that makes this century even more complicated. That's what I'm talking about, this being our Everest. The Everest we need to climb. We need to increase our food sovereignty and security, but at the same time, we also need to decrease carbon emissions. We need to decarbonize our production systems, our economies, our ways of life. And of course, the question of agriculture must remain central to all of this. We need to guarantee more growth, more development when it comes to our security. But in parallel, the agricultural sector needs to contribute to decreasing global carbon emissions. So we need to do both of these things. More growth on the one hand for geopolitical purposes, and again, on the other hand, for geopolitical purposes, a decrease in carbon emissions. If we continue with the unsustainable trajectories we're currently on, well, it will do us no good over the next 50 years. There's no point in doing what we can in terms of growth if we have a planet which can't sustain life anymore at the end of this century. So for the first time, we are now looking at, more and more people being involved in this area. And we need to do this in a way in which we move away from fossil fuels and decarbonize our economies. So healthy agricultural sector, healthy lives, that is essential. But the agricultural sector is very much a protagonist in all of this work in the medium term. So it's not, either or. We're not talking about security or sustainability. We are talking about achieving both. And then there's a third element that needs to be added to all of this as well, and that's health. Now, when it comes to health, the nutrition that you have is one of the main contributing factors to your health. When you look at the importance of, healthy eating throughout your entire life, it's a major contributing factor. So food, when it comes to food, we're not just talking about quantities and making sure that people have, an adequate quantity of food. We're talking about the quality of food as well and how nutritious it is. The question of health is even more complex today than it was in the past. We're talking about animal health and animal welfare issues, plant health, planet health as well, the health, human health. All of this is very much interconnected and very much tied up in the One Health concept that has developed over the last 2 years. Scientists tell us that the One Health concept, by definition, is something that constitutes an interdependence between us all. So no one is secure unless everyone is secure. And so we really, have this Everest, this mountain ahead of us that we need to climb. It'll be a historical effort in terms of promoting growth and then the decrease as well that we're talking about. Now, when you're on top of Everest, you've got about 1/3 the amount of oxygen that you do here in Brussels. So, you might be on top of Mount Everest and perfectly happy to have gotten there, but if you don't have enough oxygen for the journey down, then you might not make it. There are also, of course, accidents and dangers awaiting on the way down as well. So this is all what's ahead of us. We're not talking about having less of an agricultural sector in the future. We're talking about an agricultural sector which is more robust, more solid in the future, and one that is very much at the centre of the issue of decarbonisation and all things health. So we're really facing unprecedented times where more than ever we need an agricultural sector that is high performing. For the last few years, we've seen an awful lot said about the agricultural sector. And we need all systems within the agricultural sector to make these changes. All the systems, all the elements, all crops, whatever it may be, we need to guarantee that we can all be on this road towards sustainability, towards sovereignty. Because all of these systems show that there is no single model available to us today.
Tous les ans, je fais la même chose.
No farmer today will tell you, I do the exact same thing every year. That's not true. Things change from one year to another. There's no single model that doesn't change. Things change, the climate changes, the weather changes, conditions change. And so people need to be flexible and adapt constantly. Despite what you may hear, there is no single agricultural model. The reality of the situation today is that there are a number of different agricultural systems. And that, of course, makes public policy making even more complicated. Because no 2 years are the same, no two farmers are the same. And no two farmers will do the exact same thing when it comes to their work. So we need to work with agricultural systems, ones which are going to be more and more varied and probably more volatile as well. Volatility reduces our ability to forecast, that's for sure. And that can be difficult when it comes to policy making. Now, of course, people need food. People need development. people and the planet needs competition. Today, we're talking about geopolitical matters. And I don't have all afternoon, so I'll try to get to the heart of the matter. In order to do what we have to do, we need more collective work, more cooperation, break down silos between us, have a more intersectoral approach. Rather than having, all these different DGs within the Commission have one single body dealing with this, just like we have one single planet. We talk about the fact that there's no planet B. And the same goes for geopolitical questions and agricultural sections. There's no plan B. So we're in a situation where there are a huge amount of different challenges. And we need to do more together. We need more solidarity. At the moment, though, for a number of years now, we have been doing this alone for the most part. We are facing the biggest challenges that have ever been faced. We think that alone we are better, alone we can do more. And that's not the case. What we see in the agricultural sector is good news because we do see a sector which is very high performing. But at the same time, we see agricultural issues being weaponized against us. Now, here I've got an image here to give you an idea of international relations. Of course, things aren't simple today. They are incredibly complicated, and we talk a lot about the butterfly effect when it comes to international politics. We talked about the fact that events, decisions in one part of the world can have a major impact years later in other parts of the world.
Mondialisation, la prise de pouvoir de la Chine après la...
We've seen China come to power after the 2008 crisis, a crisis which changed everything, including the power dynamics in the world. We saw China and its reluctance in certain regards.
au centre de certains pays.
We've seen difficulties in some countries around the world. But with China's rise to power, what we've seen is a major player in the world, a bull in a china shop, if you will, and that having an impact in other parts of the world, particularly when it comes to our natural resources. And that's what we've had over the last 10 years or so, that bull in the china shop. We know what the limits of the planet are. We have promoted the climate and environmental agenda. We know, we're aware of the interdependence of the risks and challenges associated with it and how to interpret that. But why am I insisting on this idea here when it comes to hippopotamuses? Well, one thing that I've always been interested in is the fact that they're quite ferocious animals, more so than an elephant, really. And international issues and social issues have become more difficult over the last few years. Hippopotamuses are actually faster than elephants. And today, when it comes to political, international, social issues, everything is accelerating. Everything is going more quickly than ever. And then there's one more thing about the hippopotamus, and that is that they are polygamous. They are strategic polygamists. When we look at what we're doing today in terms of geopolitics, we talk about multi-alignment. So aligning, some countries aligning with others who maybe don't have the best relationships. You might question them initially. They might not always agree in certain sectors. They might face off against each other on certain issues. That's possible. But on some issues, they can align. So when we talk about multi-alignment, well, I think another word for that could be just polygamy. And that's what a lot of countries today are doing. And that's a challenge for what Europe wants to do. It's something that we need to look at today when faced with all of these countries who are hippopotamuses around us. We need to look at our own strengths and what they are in 2025, whether that is the strength we have in our agricultural sector, whether it remains that strength, and whether we, in a world where we're surrounded by hippopotamuses, are in a position to accept what the world looks like today and what it will look like in the future, can accept that we are not alone and that we can't go it alone,
Problème.
because that would be a problem,
Créer des
that we are alone sometimes, that we find it difficult to get people on board, to create alliances. For me, I'm wondering whether Europe is asking itself the right questions. And what are those questions that Europe should be asking of itself? Well, we need to know where we are in the world, and that's where we are there on the map. We're on the suburbs, on the edge of the world, if you will. If you've got a problem reading that map, let's zoom in. You'll see there the peninsula that is Europe. Now, when you flip the north and the south, you see how important the North Sea is, as you do on that map there. There's the geography of Europe. You'll see there the questions, the interesting, perhaps inconsistencies that might arise.
est située là où elle est sur un...
Europe is situated where it is. We have a neighborhood to the east, of course, and a neighborhood in the south with the Mediterranean, with Africa as well. I think that Europe needs to equip itself with new software, which I call 4G. It's something that everybody has on their phones. It's something that's working well here in the room. But going forward from 2025 onwards, I think Europe needs 4G, which would see it maintaining its vision in terms of the Green Deal, because of course we have that Everest that we need to climb. The Green Deal is our overarching vision to achieve carbon neutrality, and that needs to be maintained. That can't be called into doubt. The question is how we get there. So we need to reintroduce geopolitics into the mix, so that we don't forget in the world of today what our place is and what others expect of us. There are those who would like to see us no longer be where we are in 2050.
Autres G, la green...
We also need to look at those other two Gs, greenflation, for example. Less fuel, less petrol means more work, means more expenses, more difficult to produce. That's true. And it's going to be difficult to achieve the goals that we want to. It's going to require money and investment. It's going to require hard work. And it will all boil down to whether we're prepared to do that hard work in Europe. I wonder, is Europe aware that no one else is going to do the work for us?
L'Europe va travailler pour le monde.
If we continue, as we're going, then we're going to be working on behalf of all of the rest of the world. And it won't be on things that we've decided. It will be based on on decisions that others have made for us. So we need to bear all of that in mind. We need to move towards this 4G that I'm talking about. I know we talk a lot today about clean industry for Europe. And that's just it. Let's be clean, but let's also be industrial. Let's look at industry too. Let's not forget the industry part of that. We need to make sure that our industry, our economic systems, have people who are skilled, who are willing and want to work in these sectors. And we need to remember that, the industry of the future is going to be very different from the industry in the 19th century. So give us the means to be geopolitical, to achieve the Green Deal, to accept greenflation, and to be able to spread this word and sell this message around the world. So when it comes to sovereignty, we're talking about constants, we're talking about resilience, dependence, independence in sectors in which we are ahead and we want to remain ahead, ones that are in line with our green goals, and dependencies which we must manage either to reduce, to de-risk where necessary.
So, surtout.
Now, in some cases, we may be structurally dependent. We don't want to, burn bridges where necessary, but still de-risk in a smart way. Europe is a world superpower when it comes to the agricultural sector and the agri-food sector. From a trade point of view, we exported to the tune of 230 billion euro and imported 160 billion euro. Today, if you look at the major food and agricultural superpowers in the world, Europe isn't in the top 10. The US is number 1, Brazil in 3rd place. It's just like the Olympic Games. China and the US came top of the list of medals in Paris last year. But if you take Europe and all of the member states in the EU and count up all those medals, then we would be in the first place. So as 27, together we are strong, and we can certainly be stronger in the future together as well. The question is, what's the message that we want to spread? Is the surplus that we have good news for the world when it comes to that export-import? What do we export? Who do we export to? Are we exporting sustainable products, ecological products, ones that comply with environmental standards? Are they consistent with our interests here in Europe? I would prefer to see Europe care about these things and show that. So we need to look at our interests and the narrative that we have. Is it just the impact that we have? Is it just statistics, very nice statistics that we have from Eurostat, but things that nobody talks about apart from here in Brussels? Today, when you export as European countries, France, Netherlands, Italy, Romania, etc., there's no European flag, no European label on those products that are being exported. Secondly, I'd like to look at seafood and products that we have from the marine area. People around the world, in Europe included, consume about 20% of the proteins which comes from seafood. We always talk about food security, food sovereignty, but we focus solely on agricultural production. Let's not forget about seafood. That's one of the paradoxes that we have in Europe at the moment. There's a market there, a significant market in Europe. But of course, we've got less fishing for environmental reasons. We've been reluctant to develop the aquaculture sector. We go to the beach for 2 weeks in the summer, but we don't want to see economic activity there. It's the same when we go, to the countryside for a weekend once a year. Nobody wants to see the farmers at work. And the result of all of that is that Europe has a trade deficit of 25 billion euro when it comes to seafood. So we are cancelling out the surplus that we have when it comes to dairy products and grains. It's great that we have that surplus, that trade surplus there, but we're losing out on it because of the deficit with seafood. Something that everybody eats that people love, things like salmon, which we buy off Norway, for example, who has developed an aquaculture sector thanks to offshore petrol-based funds, of course. So what does Europe need to do? Well, it needs to find its place. Look at investment, innovation, and how it stands towards these things. How we're going to green our industrial systems, our agricultural systems, our ways of life, and how quickly we want to do all of this. Bearing in mind that in a world of hippopotamuses, you've got those who will not stop at anything. There are those who don't respect the rules. And so Europe is in a difficult position because we want to respect the rules. We believe in rules and standards, and that's good news, of course. If not, we wouldn't be who we are, but we need to be aware of the fact that the world is different and that not everybody plays by the same rules that we do. And so we need to look at how we can do and how quickly we can do what we want to do. And it's not a question of if, I mean, this is something we have to do. To invest in the Green Deal, we need to make sure we're not economically or geopolitically in the red. Without investment in sustainability, then politically, economically, geopolitically speaking, we're in the red. So we need to find coherence and consistency across all of these things. And then finally, to wrap up, we speak a lot today about sustainable competitiveness, and that's a good thing. For me, agricultural competitiveness, whether we're talking about a farmer or a company, a small innovative SME or a family company, a corporation, whatever the size of the holding, today we need to measure competitiveness based on 5 pillars: profitability, the question of sustainability, I've mentioned that already. And that includes social sustainability as well. We shouldn't underestimate social sustainability when we're talking about agricultural and food issues. Then being able to diversify, that's a way of de-risking. And de-risking is also an important pillar. De-risking from foreign interference, digital issues, which can pose a major problem as well. De-risking from a trade point of view, from certain providers. De-risking is something that is multifaceted. There are many different dimensions to it. And we need to remember the holistic view that I spoke about at the beginning and the long-term view. And then, of course, we have the issue of portability as well when it comes to competitiveness. Whether the farm is something that can be kept going, if it is sustainable, if we've got good, sustainable natural resources, for example, then it's something that could be passed on because it is competitive. It is linked to markets, it creates revenue, it creates social cohesion, and it's something that can be passed on. And as I'm looking, 50 years ahead, 2075, the big question will be, do we have competitive agriculture? And I think with the 5 things I've mentioned there, then we can manage to do that. Now, this also means that if we want to climb Everest, then we need to look at what we're doing in terms of the production of food. There are conflicts in terms of production methods, less petrol, less fossil fuels available to us. But that means we can go back and see what we had before the 21st century, biomass, for example. We need to look for new innovative solutions, solar panels, whatever that may be. Renewable energy at home so that we don't have to continue to import gas, petrol from the south, from the east, which increases our debts and increases our health problems. We need to look for clean bioenergy, which comes from the agricultural world. So we need to make sure that all of our work there is consistent with the Green Deal as well and with our ambitions towards decarbonisation. And then finally, a last word on Ukraine. We've had over 1,000 days of conflict. Well, longer, much longer, even since this conflict began in 2014. So it's been 10 years, really, of conflict on the border of Europe. Conflict which has grown and grown. And I'm aware of all of the sensibilities when it comes to Ukraine and all things agriculture in particular. But I just wanted to recall the fact that the European Union, Ukraine, we're a team. We play as a team. And when you join, when a player joins a team, a player who is a major agricultural player, then you allow them to play to their strengths. So when a player joins a team, a good player who has certain strengths, one that you have supported as they've developed throughout the years, one that you've promised will be welcome in the team, you know, you're not going to undermine them. You're going to play them, you're going to allow them to play to their strengths and make sure that you all play together. Now, if we don't do that, then the Ukrainian issue will become very complex, I think. We're aware when it comes to agriculture that there are competitors in the world who are strong, who have good skills, ones that can maybe play better because they don't respect the rules, they don't play by the same rules. We're aware of that, but Ukraine can be a strength to our agricultural strength in Europe. We need to organize ourselves in a way that we can include it. And we need to make sure, of course, that, you know, when somebody joins a team, you respect the rules, the values of that team. But we're very much just at the start of all this, and it depends on how Europe values agriculture. We want to be strong when we play at home, and we also want to be strong on the world stage as well. So I think Europe has every reason to continue to be at the table. The big question now is whether we will all be able to sit at the same side of the table and speak with one voice. And we all have issues which are important to us at home, but when we stand together, we want to make sure we speak with one voice and have the same message. And that's what I wanted to share with you this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sebastian. Very thought-provoking and energizing keynote there, and a lot of questions perhaps our panelists might care to answer. So I'm going to call them up onto the stage now. I'd like to welcome Luis Carazo, Head of Unit, the Americas, DG for Agriculture and Rural Development, European Commission. If you could kindly sit here. Thank you. I'd like to also invite Nelly Haidu, Secretary General Selka. Please come and take a seat. I'd like to ask Christelle Delberg, Director General, Eurocommerce. Welcome. And also Jan Dolejal, COPPA Vice President. Welcome. And finally, Bodo Steiner, Professor, Food Economics and Business Management, University of Helsinki. Thank you so much. And just to say that Sébastien Abbey will be joining us at the end, just to give his take on the panel discussion. So, as I said at the beginning, we're going to be talking about food sovereignty, geopolitics, which was so eloquently highlighted in Sébastien's keynote, and also international trade. And Slido is open, so please do start sending your questions in. But I'm going to start really talking about food sovereignty in the EU and also an enlarged EU. And I'm going to start with Luis Carazo at DG Agri. Luis, what pathways are there, do you think, for the EU to reduce and manage critical import dependencies in an open trade environment, and also considering enlargement?
Good afternoon. Does it work? Yes. Good afternoon to all of you. Thanks for the opportunity. I could like maybe to take now the conversation into more down the ground and the realities of international trade after the very interesting presentation that has provided us with the intellectual framework. I will go directly to the question, food sovereignty and the European Union. The European Union is food sovereign. I think for me this is a starting point. It has been presented in one of the pictures where we are in the world, and according to your picture, we were in the corner of the world. We are indeed small geographically speaking, and we are indeed small in terms of the population. We represent more or less 5.5% of the world population. I was just looking at the statistics as to how the world population is expected to grow in the next 25 years. And it turns out that there will be 1.5 billion more people in the planet Earth, and the population of the Union, of the European Union, will remain stable or will stagnate during this period of time. Meaning, if we were not small enough, we will become smaller in future in relation to our population. And nevertheless, we are the main exporter of agri-food produce in the world. So the performance is already extraordinary. Then we can enter into the details, but we export more than anyone else. We import a lot as well, and the overall trade balance is very positive. It's second in the world, only after Brazil, with the big difference that Brazil, as it has been explained, is a very important exporter, not as important as we are, but basically does not import anything. So I could say that the European Union food system is sovereign because we can produce far more than what we consume. We can do it in a sustainable way. And what is very, very important in terms of the trade dimension, we do it through a very successful integration of our food system in the global food system. Meaning that we export all over the world a portfolio of, generally speaking, high-value produce, but we also export basic materials, and this is very important in relation to the geopolitics, because here we are talking about our main destinations in the southern Mediterranean countries. So it's important that we keep doing that. It's not only the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians do it, that we keep exporting cereals and grains and meat to this part of the world. It's important for them, some for ourselves. But we are very specialized actor in the global food system. So do we have input that we don't produce enough ourselves? Yes, some of them. And we are taking advantage of our very positive integration in the global food system. So I could not expect about dependencies. I could rather speak in our particular case about integration. And then we can develop, maybe there are some portfolio of our inputs where we could try to produce a little bit more. But the main message that I would like to center around in my first intervention is that we are successfully integrated in the global food system.
So I just wanted to follow up really with a point that Sébastien made really. We are potentially missing opportunities with our fisheries. Could we be doing more there?
I work for DG Agri. I don't know if I'm very qualified voice to speak about fisheries. I prefer that we move to the next, question, if that's okay for you.
Yes, so I'll go on to Christelle Delberger from Eurocommerce. So what role can retailers play in promoting food sovereignty in the EU? And how can we balance the need for sustainable and local food systems with the need for affordability and accessibility?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Obviously, it never works in the first time. Good afternoon, everyone. So on behalf of retail and wholesale is a key player in the food supply chain, agri-food supply chain. We are the key element that brings every day a diverse choice of essential daily food staples to consumers across Europe, so everywhere in Europe. What we today, I think we're talking about food security and food sovereignty. In terms of food security, Luis, you said it. Europe ensures full security to its citizens. There may be disruptions. There will be, or there is, an urgent need to invest, and in particular in the climate, to deal with the climate issues and sustainability issues. That is recognized. However, globally, food security is ensured despite all the disruptions. We've seen it in COVID. We've seen it even more recently with the floods in Valencia. The systems are there to provide daily staples. As a sector, what we consider, and we've been a member of the strategic dialogue on the future of agriculture, what we recognize is the importance in that agri-food system to ensure food sovereignty and security. It is for everyone to align on that vision for a competitive, performing, resilient, sustainable and diverse agri-food chain. And we will find all of these elements, be that in agriculture, in processing, trading, and retail. So our sector is a key partner in that chain, delivering that choice. And within that, what we do is provide consumers with the daily staples that they expect to find. So that is the big brands, your favorite chocolate or paste, or your favorite soft drinks. We also bring diversity of local brands and fresh products. For all of these, we work with diverse types of suppliers. We work with large brands, we work with small local suppliers, and we work with smaller brands. What we need to ensure that, what we need to serve consumers as well is the volumes. If you are operating a network of stores within a country or across several countries, well, you need to work with partners that will offer the volumes for it. So we may be in the sector working with very small suppliers and locally at the level of the store, but globally we also need to work with larger suppliers. So ensuring that sovereignty, ensuring that that security, it means that you have to work with a diverse networks of suppliers, diverse types of suppliers that cater to different types of consumers. I would like to add a last point is the importance of the single market. We can only ensure resilience in Europe if we have a properly functioning single market. This is what we need to offer, in particular, to prevent or to equip ourselves in case of disruptions. but it is also what will offer consumers the affordability that they need. It is also what will offer the skill for operators to invest in the sustainability dimension as well. Thank you.
So you talk about that, but what about if and when the EU enlarges, how will the retail sector cope?
Enlargement, so our organization has recently integrated an association in Ukraine of grocery retailers. We see this as an important move, and it has to be prepared. We've heard about it just before. We see a huge potential. Ukraine is a major global partner. It's a major global player. What will be essential if and when enlargement happens will be to integrate Ukraine and ensure that the production standards are aligned and properly integrated into our European system. So a stronger alignment in terms of the production standards, the sustainability standards will be essential to create the level playing field that we all need in the single market. We as a sector, we will play our role as well in terms of supporting locally the production standards, whether that's in terms of how we operate the stores, but also in terms of the products that are being served to consumers.
Thank you. Nelly Haidu from Salka. So we know that the EU, we've heard that the EU remains self-sufficient and its share of EU exports in total global trade is good, but it's still protein dependent. And so what strategies do you think the EU can employ to reduce its protein dependency, considering both the supply side and also demand side solutions?
So good afternoon, everyone. Do you hear me well? Yeah, it's really weird when you speak in it, but you don't hear it. So thank you very much for this very timely debate, and I'm very grateful that also the traders are getting a seat at this table today. Then I have to say, actually, I can stop because Luis already said everything I wanted to say. Well. Right? That we don't have very often, I think. Before answering, I wanted to highlight 4 points on that. I think the first problem in this debate we're having is on the rhetorics. If we say continuously dependency, we're creating an impression of a relatively negative environment for agri-food production and trade. And in fact, Luis, you said it, we are actually a big net exporter. We're creating a lot of agricultural food and value-add food. Yeah, so we are far ahead and leading in that regard. So we are in a very positive environment. We are operating, and this is a reality, and I think Sebastian mentioned it as well, in a deeply integrated, internationalized, and globalized environment. This is irreversible. From the farmer to the trader to the processor, all of us have an internationalized environment. So this is something we have to acknowledge when we look at this debate. A third element I would like to flag is competitive advantage. And I think when we look at trade, it is always, you know, the classic rule, we deliver from areas of deficits, from surplus to deficits, and from seasons of surplus to seasons of deficits. So there is also the element of competitive advantage on that. We have also enhanced this with a second component, and I was very happy to see when Sebastian said it, on the component of sustainability in the competitive advantage. So if we're looking at, for example, protein production, we also need to take into account the sustainability dimension. So who is in a better position to economically, socially, but also environmentally produce goods in the best way possible. So I think these are the elements we need to take into account. And the last one is climate change. We are going into a period of structural changes of production. Yeah, we have 6 times as many droughts, floods, 6 times as many floods, 3 times as many droughts as 20 years ago. And we have to face and acknowledge that we will also experience crop migration towards northeast. Right, so we have to have this kind of strategic consideration, also keeping in mind when we look at enlargement with Ukraine. So what kind of strategies? I think we have to do some homework internally. Yeah? So the first one is we still have a competitiveness gap within the single market. Not all member states in the European Union are participating equally and benefiting equally from agri-food trade. We still have the traditional players in that regard. This is something we need to resolve because it will also help us to solve trade challenges. The second element is we need to do contingency planning within our single market. Who will be the future producers? What kind of capacities we have here? Yeah? What can we do in areas where we have not yet used the full capacity of agri-food production? Because we may have dramatic changes in that regard. And this is, by the way, also a recommendation within the strategic dialogue on the future of agriculture. And lastly, we need to strengthen, obviously, transparent and fair and open trade relationships because integration is irreversible.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Bodo Steiner now from the University of Helsinki. From a researcher's perspective, what lessons do you think can be learned from other countries' experiences in strategic dependencies and ensuring food security in the face of this global disruptions that we've been hearing about?
If I may take...
Oh, you need a microphone. There you are.
Thank you so much. And let me mention that I am educated as a farmer, grew up on a farm, and our MUTS project is called Making Agricultural Trade Sustainable, where we have tried to get 15 partners from a diversity of EU, African countries and commodities to focus on this aspect of social and environmental sustainability. If I may try and answer by going backward and saying a few things that we have also found when it comes to the resilience debate are very important. That is, the voices that we have from the different countries, from the different case studies. Number one, when Nelly talked just about the scenarios, what we've really found important, we do not have enough of SDG proofing. We don't have enough an ex ante impact assessment before we move further ahead. That's something just on the strategies that we don't need to do just internally, but also when we think of future trade agreements. That is very important and neglected. If I may come back to Crystal, who was talking about the role of retailers, especially the larger suppliers, our experience in the project is think of deforestation-free supply chain directive and law. What is the role of larger versus smaller suppliers? And surprise, surprise, the expectation is that because we will have higher compliance costs being imposed on smaller farmers, small-scale farmers, Cocoa Africa, Tanzania, Uganda, name it, Kenya, we have many examples here. It will lead, deforestation-free supply chain law will lead to an exclusion of small-scale farmers, which goes against the objectives of the Commission to uphold sustainability. In other words, the exclusion of small-scale farmers is a decline in social sustainability. If I may then come with my longer answer, if I may, to Sebastian, I would very much support, of course, the visions there, and I'm trying to think maybe we need a more concrete, a real hands-on examples of how do we manage not only a hippopotamus going wild, but going wild without, I would argue, breaking down the silos of the Commission. So I would think from even a research perspective, we need to have impact assessment, we need to have the divisions, I would argue for that. However, when we look at our country evidence, feedback from different studies, qualitative and quantitative, coherence is a big issue. We have always received the feedback on analytically that policy incoherence is a big issue for the lack of accepting trade agreements, for the lack of adopting even sustainability standards. So policy coherence goes along with more transparency. If you are able to provide these ex-ante impact assessment, you share the results with those that will be affected, small-scale farmer, what will you get? Obviously, buy-in by those farmers means the future adoption costs of those sustainability standards will be much lower. The farmers will adopt them more easily financially, and thereby you are able to raise sustainability standards economically and socially. So in that sense, it's very important to think of coherence as a keyword. And at the same time, when Sebastian was talking about the polygamy and the complexity, what we also find from our various country case studies, again, I think of coffee, cocoa, multi-stakeholder initiatives really work. We have seen CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. We've seen D4 as initiatives from the EU that have basically moved ahead without involving foreign countries, without involving civil society stakeholders from African countries. And you can resolve this complexity, I'm saying, by, for example, giving a voice to those mostly affected also by EU exports. So we find clear evidence that coherence proofing is important, SDG proofing is important, and triple bottom line impact assessments are absolutely key. And in that sense, then all this will help food security also, food security. We have to remember the FAO, this talks about food security in terms of access to affordable and physical access and economic access to affordable and nutritious food, but also now we have 6 dimensions of food security that includes agency, here are my small-scale whole farmers, and sustainability at the core of food security in the future. We have a highly complex system and we need to therefore break it down, like I said, in terms of future-proofing with regard to triple bottom line impact assessments, inclusive, that is stakeholder involving value chain assessments, and this will be, I think, a core part of the solution of making both the EU food security and global food security more effective in the future.
Thank you. Would anyone like to respond to that before I move on to Jan Dolezal from the COPA? No? No one?
I can very much agree with this importance of policy coherence, the importance of having sustainability as part of the future, and that's embedded in strategies. In our sector, we've got large companies increasingly signed up to SBTi commitments. They're struggling with it, but the direction of travel is there, and we need to work together as a chain to move in that direction. And the point on impact assessment, fact-based impact assessment. We're still struggling with legislations that is being put forward without proper impact assessment, without looking at the consequences, direct or indirect, on whether that will fulfill the mission that we're trying to achieve here, which is the long-term sustainability of the agri-food ecosystem, and sustainability being economic, social, and environmental. We're seeing proposals without an impact assessment on the single market, and that's a big element in getting Europe back on the map. So we still have some way to go in that direction.
Thank you very much. Jan Dolezal, let's get the perspective of farmers. And I know you're a farmer-turned-researcher, but you're representing millions of farmers. So what do you think farmers need to support a gradual integration of candidate countries and their smooth integration into a single market?
So good afternoon. I'm glad to be here, happy to be a part of the discussion, especially being a farmer and also being someone who comes from a country from Central Europe, which was actually a candidate country more than 20 years ago, and I still remember a bit the process. I was 10 at the moment when we applied for the membership, and I believe it took us 8 years to actually become full members of the EU, and there was a gradual process. I remember that on our farm, we started to receive a portion of the subsidy, so I believe it was 25%, and it went up. It was so-called phasing in process. So especially when you're incorporating new member states and let's say bigger member states with agriculture, which is a big part of their GDP, you have to be very careful. And when that was right about Poland 20 years ago, and now it should be right about Ukraine. They're very much dependent on agriculture when it comes to their economy. I believe 17% of their GDP is dependent on agriculture. But on the other hand, right now we're starting to talk about the next budget, next MMF, and the CAB budget. And we as farmers, we always say, when we're talking about reforms, they ask us to do more for less money. Because there's not much incentive right now for member states to actually increase the European budget. So I would be very careful about countries like Ukraine. Ukraine is about 41 million hectares. So it's a very big country. It'd be a big strain on the budget, and we have to be very careful about that. And also drawing from the experience from 2022, when we started helping Ukraine to get on their feet, so to speak, when with the whole invasion situation from Russia, we started doing it by helping them access our market easier. And this was a big shock for farmers, especially when it comes to wheat prices, sugar prices, poultry prices, and other commodities. So we're still a bit reeling from that shock, which happened 2 years ago. And I think we need to be very careful. And also there's a question about other countries which are sort of waiting for the membership. We have countries like Serbia, countries like Turkey. They have been waiting for quite a long time. So we'll see what will happen about that. But we all agree that we have to help Ukraine. But on the other hand, we have to find a way how to help Ukraine without harming farmers.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to turn now to geopolitical challenges and international trade and deal with a question that has been asked throughout the conference, and it's just come in on this panel discussion, and it's about Mercosur. The question is, free trade agreement in agricultural sector like Mercosur or Ukraine is much more competition between farmers than cooperation. How to reverse this? Well, I mean, clearly, I think many people here will not want to reverse it, but could I please ask Luis to respond to that?
Thank you for the question. And I maybe will take the question by referring to Mercosur, which I understand is a topical question. And I know that I run the risk of not convincing everyone around the table, but nevertheless, I will try to do my best. The negotiation with Mercosur has taken 25 years, and this shows, how stubborn and how fiercely we have defended our position. I will not enter into the geostrategic importance of Mercosur in general terms, because it seems quite obvious to me. What I would like to explain is what has been the position of the DG Agri, which is in charge of the discussion and negotiation of the agricultural part of any FTA. And on this, let me point out something which I think is very important. When we discuss trade negotiations with other partners, this is normally only in the hands of the authorities in charge of commerce, the trade ministries. In the case of the European Union, there is something very specific in our setting. It is that those negotiations are carried out by both the Trade and the Agriculture Commissioner. And at the end of the day, in what comes to agriculture, the last word is with the Agriculture Commissioner. Only this shows the importance that the European Union is attaching to obtain good results for agriculture within FTAs. And there is almost nobody else in the world which replicates our system. So that when negotiating trade agreements, the Agriculture Commissioner has the last word on the final result. Negotiating with Mercosur is very difficult because indeed it's an international powerhouse. And nevertheless, we have a struggle, and I think that we have achieved, to obtain a result that is balanced within agriculture. I would not go into what I think is a misinterpretation or representation of the outcome of the negotiation. This is that we are selling more cars in return for more agricultural products, imports. I don't think it is that. We have made sure that within agriculture, the negotiation made sense. It's true that because it's Mercosur and because Mercosur is very competitive in certain produce, we had to grant some market concessions on sectors that we consider to be sensitive. And for those sectors, we are very careful. We calibrate the quotas so that they represent a fraction of the European Union consumption. And we utilize a series of negotiation techniques, including the requirements that are imposed on the quotas, so that the incoming additional imports into the union market are absorbable by the sector. And this is something that we do through all these products for which we are sensitive, meaning that we feel that Mercosur is more competitive than our own. But also we have negotiated offensive interest for European Union agriculture, including for sectors that otherwise are close to our exports because of the high import duties in Mercosur. And this includes wine, dairy, olive oil, some fruits. So as any negotiation, if you want to obtain a result, there are losses and wins. And this is the art of negotiating. I have never come across a negotiation where you can win everything and you don't have to give anything in return for that. And this is what the Commission is doing. So I will now move from this kind of detailed explanation that we may go into more detail if someone wants to do it, into a little bit your general question. What will Mercosur agreement add into the position of the European Union agri-food sector in the global system? It will provide for a better integration because of this easiness of our trade, both sides on agriculture. And what is very, very important, and this is a kind of qualitative aspect of FTAs that nevertheless is essential quantitatively as well. Because FTAs at the long term imply an effort to get closer together in terms of the policy formulation. I'm talking about future policy formulation in terms of the standards, in terms of understanding each other better, in terms of having a better grasp of what are the rationale behind the respective policy decisions. All these are elements that we can better secure through having FTAs that also apply to agriculture. So that would be maybe a long reply to your question. Do our free trade agreements and international trade negotiations in agriculture making our own agriculture sector more sustainable and better placed in the global system? They do. Do we have to pay some price for that in return for the gains? We have. Are we securing a negotiation that overall is positive? I'm convinced that we have succeeded in securing that.
Thank you very much for a detailed explanation and well said. I'll just bring in a couple of the panel if they want to. We don't want to go into a big debate about it, but just your reactions. So Nelly, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I actually do want to come in on this topic. I didn't think that I would want to come in, but yes, because I think Louis said something very important, losers and winners, and I would like to draw the attention actually to the report on the strategic dialogue on the future of agriculture, because this is also a debate about losers and winners, right? Because it was hard negotiations. One major element we saw over the last year was obviously, when looking at the farmers' protests, was the issue of trade and the impact of trade on agricultural production. And we have really tried to respond to that in the report. And that's why I would like to firstly highlight that the report, and I'm a bit worried about the discourse we have seen about the report in the last 3 or 4 months, was a lot about common agricultural policy, it was about animal and livestock farming, but on this very critical chapter, with a lot of constructive approaches, we haven't seen a lot of discourse. It kind of disappeared, yeah? We're looking just on certain elements, but there is a whole set of recommendations which I really urge you to read and to take into account. That's my first take on it, yeah? The second element, what we see on the discussions we have on the Mercosur agreement, is that we need solutions and constructive and innovative approaches to address the diverging standards issue. Yeah? This debate is returning. It has been 10 years ago on SPS and food safety. Now we have it on sustainability, and we haven't yet found a solution. So what can be the answers to really benefit from trade agreements? I think the first one, and we really said it very clearly, is we need more coherence. And Bodo, that you're backing up with science is really great, because we talked a lot about evidence-based, yeah, about we need to have really a strong scientific support on that. And I applaud that you also found this in your research, yeah, we need coherence. This means we also need a change in the institutional approach on trade policy within the European Commission. Yeah, we really need to review if DG Trade is really having the export focus and imports is covered by so many different DGs. I think the minimum result must be a cluster, a coherence unit within DG Agriculture and Food or something like that. I think we need to be creative here, knowing that changing institutional structures is difficult. The second element is we need more transparency and comparability. How do we create that? Impact assessment, Chriselle, yeah, we need impact assessments. They need to be more detailed. They need to really also explain the conditions in which we operate and those our third countries operate. But we also have a benchmarking system under discussion. And while it appears that this is particularly and in first priority a farmers' discussion, we're establishing here a sort of benchmark system which could also have positive/negative impacts on trade, but it can help us to create sort of a transparency and comparability system. So it's very important to have trade involved in this discussion as well. And lastly, I think what we completely forget is we have in the WTO an implementation and monitoring pillar, which we can use much more creatively as we have done so far. Yeah? So we don't need new negotiations, but we can really build on that by establishing transparency mechanisms, develop common methodologies for sustainability, for example, on emissions. I think there's a whole toolbox on that. And to conclude, I can only warn to read that chapter and just say, oh, reciprocity, finally we have the solution. Reciprocity is one element, but I think we need to be much more creative on that. So I think we have here really a toolbox we need to use to address exactly what we're seeing right now in the response on the Mercosur agreement.
Thank you very much. And Jan, if you can be brief as well, because I've got to get some more questions in, hopefully.
I'll try to be brief. When we're talking about impact assessments, as anyone actually seen an impact assessment on the EU-Mercosur deal when it comes to impact on farmers, the farming in the EU? Maybe it should have been published before the document or the treaty was signed. It will still be ratified, but maybe it should have been published before. And we're talking about winners and losers. You know, the thing is that farmers, especially farmers nowadays in 2024, after a couple of years of the inflation, of the rise of input costs, after COVID, you know, after supply chain issues, after things like that. It's very difficult for us to accept that we will be another time once again that we will be losers of this agreement. You know, because when we're talking about things like custom duties on electric vehicles from China, the Chinese are talking about executing sort of a revenge on European agriculture, especially on brandy, or next in line is dairy sector actually, which is very important for Europe. So we can't afford to be losers all the time, and I believe that this deal, as it stands right now, it's just not acceptable for farmers. You know, it will create a huge problem for us, and when we're talking about sustainability for the future, especially economic sustainability, will be a huge issue for us.
Thank you very much. I want to broaden it slightly. Okay, I didn't want to make it a Mercosur debate, but please come in, and then I'll go to Bodo Steiner to broaden it. But Louis, would you like to comment?
I don't want to make it Mercosur either, because I know I will lose it out. But yes, very rapidly to remark impact assessment. I didn't want to react on that. We have published, I think if there is something that characterizes the Commission as a public authority, is transparency and a lot of policy making papers supporting our choices. I refer, for instance, to a study that shows the cumulative impact of FTAs has been published, has been reviewed already twice. And it contains an assessment of what would be the consequences of Mercosur as it has been negotiated. The question is that normally impact assessment, when are mentioned, is when they do not exist. That's the only usefulness of impact assessments. When the impact assessments are there and the conclusions are not in line with our own wishes, we forget about them. So the Commission is not coming up with measures out of the blue.
Yeah.
There is work behind that. Let me finish this only 2 seconds. I said that there are some sectors for which Mercosur is more competitive than us, and therefore we have given calibrated, limited trade concessions. But I said as well that we have wins for the farming sector, also for the farming sector, and I don't understand why these wins are systematically neglected. Olive oil is produced by farmers and cooperatives, and will have better access. Wine is produced by farmers and cooperatives, and will get much better access to a market that is expanding and to which we have today very difficulties to entry. Dairy and cheeses are produced by farmers and cooperatives. I'm not presenting this Mercosur as everything is wonderful, and I said that negotiation where you win everything do not exist. I'm presenting Mercosur as an outcome which is globally balanced also for agriculture.
Thank you very much. Bodo, broadening it from Mercosur, I want to look at international trade agreements, and we haven't got very long left, so if you can be fairly brief. How can international collaborations actually strengthen the EU's food security?
To strengthen the EU's food security, we need more effective mechanisms. We need more effective also sustainability standards. When you have a sustainability standards implementation that is trusted by those who are being affected, the farmers, and if those sustainability standards, we're talking about triple bottom line, of course, are satisfying economic sustainability, etc., then this will also strengthen the effectiveness of trade agreements. Those who will be affected by future trade agreements, if those have been currently positively impacted by increasing revenue, for example, global gap as a sustainable production standard in Kenya, in Africa, meaning in the African coffee and other value chains. If the revenues are being increased, export market access has been increased for small farmers in Africa, they will see, well, we can, for future trade agreements, embrace those perhaps more if, again, talking about effectiveness and transparency, if the Commission and others will share before us what are the impact assessment again, before we are pushing down those trade agreements in the future. In other words, the effectiveness of a sustainability standard in creating income, in raising social and environmental sustainability standards upwards, supports the effectiveness of future trade agreements, and through there also food security. Remember, please, again, I'm thinking of the extended definition of food security from the FAO that embraces agency, think of the smallholder farmers' market power asymmetries, and that embraces sustainability. So in that sense, the standards are very much connected with future resilience of us all. And I also think it's important once more to think of resilience in a global sense, that we really shouldn't think of, okay, resilience from only the EU's perspective. But of course, if we support, and we haven't talked about investment really, we need to talk more about private-public partnerships and investment in sustainable production practices, not just in Europe, but especially in African countries, from our case studies, from our studies. That is, if we support this kind of investment in more sustainable production practices, that increases food security in those African countries, and that thereby supports global food security. Then we have less tasks to do, in a sense, in Europe. So of course we need to think food security connected globally, and therefore also investment tools need to be, I think, thought through much more, and we need much more private-public partnerships also from the EU to support this in our case, in case studies in African countries and also in Latin America. We found that evidence.
Thank you very much. Christelle, I'm just going to ask you for a final comment before I ask Sebastian to come and wrap up. So do you have any reaction to this?
Yes, I'd like to emphasize again the importance of Europe being part of interdependent world, the concept that was highlighted earlier in the discussion. We're part of those global supply chains. We're working with partners across the world. The free trade agreements are a conduit, or they're facilitator for these. What we do is also supporting or elevating the production standards in countries outside Europe. We are exporting our standards of production. Whatever we sell in Europe has to meet the high European standards, whether that's in terms of product safety, product quality, and increasingly around the sustainability criteria. Think also about the remuneration schemes and the growth of a fair trade product that has come along on retail shelves, and we have given access to those products inside Europe. So we, together with our supply chains, we are working towards lifting up those standards. What we need in the framework of the free trade agreements and international relations is also to help local suppliers to understand those standards and apply them. So it really is about Europe has high standards, and it's about lifting the standards elsewhere in the world, but working together in partnership.
Thank you very much. Sebastian, would you like to come and take a seat just here? We have 3 minutes left, so I will ask you to be very concise. So how do you respond to this very robust discussion here? What stood out for you?
Okay, thank you, Anya. Thank you. Let me back in French, because I would like to talk in official languages of a member state of European Union, and so to abandon English a little bit. It's the reality. So,
Well, 3 points of reflection that I had when listening to all the panelists here. First of all, on Europe, we've seen that there is a request for consistency between all of the EU's policies as a whole, between what is decided on the EU level and on member state level. So consistency, coherence is one thing. Constancy in what the European Union actually rolls out. Perhaps we need to find our way back to being more constant and consistent in the rules, the standards, and the investment priorities that are actually implemented. And then there's the question of trust, finally. But trust, of course, stems from being consistent and constant. And on a topic such as Mercosur, that could amount to saying, well, the Commission negotiated well, and we trust the Commission in ensuring that the commitments made in this agreement are abided by in the interest of the European Union, of European countries, of the European sectors that are deemed to be strategic. So, on the topic of Mercosur, when that was debated, we've seen that the debate is above all one of trust. Let me come back to my metaphor of the hippopotamus here. I wasn't saying that Europe should model itself on an aggressive hippopotamus, but rather we can be not perhaps a kind hippopotamus, but an intelligent hippopotamus in today's world. And that means noting, and I'm sorry that I perhaps sound brutal in saying this, that for Brazil, President Lula's priority was to sign the mega deal that he signed with China during the G20 meeting. Mercosur was a minor file for him. There were 30 huge sectoral agreements with China, which is by far the strategic partner for Brazil. In parallel with this, the United Arab Emirates announced that they invested $100 billion in Brazil in 5 major sectors, agriculture being one of them, and agri-food, and that this would be rolled out from now on until 2035. So Europe isn't alone here. So we need more trust, more consistency, more constancy. What does that give us? Credibility internally within what we do here, and credibility externally in our face outwards. If you want to be credible, we need to avoid our major competitor being Europe and our inconsistencies and contradictions. We cannot be our own worst enemy, which is sometimes the case. Sometimes we compete amongst Europeans. Sometimes we end up creating problems domestically here in Europe instead of presenting a united front. Just a couple more concluding points. We've talked about Europe. Let's talk about farmers. What do European farmers want? Of course they want consistency, constancy and trust, but they also want income. Let's not be afraid of saying this. If you're a fisher, a farmer, an agriculture operator, wanting to make a profit is not a problem. That means paying for agricultural and food production, which is going to be greener and at higher standards tomorrow, and giving them a fair price for it. The question is, do we pay a fair price for our European produce today? Second, farmers need to be entrepreneurial. They have to be able to take risks. They have to be courageous. They have to be able to change their systems, decarbonize, and invest. Third, they need resources, and not just financial resources, natural resources, of course, but also human resources. If Europe finds itself clean and green in 2050, but we have no more farmers because nobody wants to work in this sector anymore because they were told that the farming sector is not strategic, it wasn't a sector of the future, it wasn't a strategic priority in Europe, then by 2050, from an agriculture and food point of view, we may be completely dependent on other parts of the world because we don't have the resources, human or natural, or the industry here in Europe anymore, because a lot of the food, of course, is processed. We should not have a world of tomorrow where we can't feed tomorrow's consumers. There's a food chain here which is very highly performing now in Europe. I have a third point. I'll be brief. When it comes to European citizens, consumers, I say this as a teacher. And I see many young people in Europe today in their 20s who sometimes give me the impression that they're extremely worried about the future. First of all, let me say that we're very lucky to be living in Europe. Second, you're better off living in 2025 than in 1950, for instance. Third, we are fortunate to have a great amount of food security in Europe. So food security isn't just something for farmers or DG Agri to be dealing with. The topic of farming is something of concern and relevant to all our citizens on a daily basis. And I say this because I think that we need to explain this more clearly. We need to reignite enthusiasm for Europe. Look at this very diverse panel that is sat here today. Look at the example of the Erasmus program, which was a fantastic tool for European integration. The Erasmus program was a marvelous tool. And we're even told that Erasmus created a number of European babies. I just take this opportunity to recall that the Common Agricultural Policy gave rise to many more European babies than the Erasmus program.
Much, and for your slightly outside the box perspectives on the discussion. And I'd like to thank all our panelists for your very robust interventions. Big round of applause, please. Thank you. Thank you. I knew you wanted to.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I have to say, I didn't think we'd have a panel where we talked about a polyamorous hippopotamus, but there's always a first for everything. Thank you. Really, really interesting. I'm sure the conversation is now going to continue in the break. I'm sure our panelists would be happy if you sidled up to them for a chat. They're not nodding at me, but I'm sure that they would be. So we're going to take a quick break. If you're watching us online, I'm going to start us again in just over 20 minutes from now. We've got experts talking about the MTO report from the wine and olive oil and macroeconomics areas, all available now. So, ladies and gentlemen, take a quick break. We're going to be back here talking about research and innovation at 4 o'clock. Thank you.